Every day, we get news about the health effects of extreme weather, like heat waves, floods, droughts, and violent storms. But we hear a lot less about the effect on mental health. 48% of Americans today believe their mental health is currently affected by climate change. They're right. Climate change can have short and long-term effects on mental health. Heat waves contribute to violence and suicides, and people who take psychiatric meds need to watch their heat exposure. Trauma from natural disasters starts with the immediate stresses of lost homes, pets, and physical injuries. Over months, financial problems and social disconnection can contribute to depression, PTSD, alcohol and substance use, irritability, insomnia, and even domestic violence and child abuse. Slower-moving weather events like droughts or coastal erosion have impacts that contribute to long-term chronic stress, including high levels of anxiety and depression. Children, older adults, the chronically ill, migrants, and refugees are even more vulnerable than most of us. So how can the negative psychological effects of climate change be reduced? There are a lot of solutions, but one is to build psychological resilience, which is bolstered through social support and connection.
How do you define climate anxiety?
The understanding that things are changing really rapidly around me right now, and I don't necessarily have full control over what happens to me or what my future looks like.
Growing up in suburban Northern Virginia, 17-year-old high school student Layla always loved the outdoors. She calls it her happy place.
This place, for me personally, that's unchangeable and also happens to be in nature, where I feel like I have control over my environment.
But after facing record temperatures, drastic flooding, and power outages, Layla realized she was living with the fear of environmental doom. And the COVID pandemic didn't help.
I felt like I was just being sequestered to my room, and my anxiety and my mental health issues just kind of doubled and tripled upon themselves.
Still, a few minutes of fresh air would help her get through the school day. Then, in June of 2021, Layla suffered from a severe heat rash.
I went outside for a 5-minute break in between, and I started experiencing extreme pinpricks of pain across my chest. I started feeling really exhausted. I was on the verge of a panic attack because I'd never experienced anything like that before.
Today, Layla is one of thousands of young people around the country taking on climate change and fighting back against the adults in power, who they say knowingly polluted the earth.
21 young people ages 11 to 22 are suing the federal government over policies they say are destroying their world.
Lawsuits have been filed around the world from plaintiffs as young as 8 years old. And while many of them get tossed, for the first time in history, a youth-led climate change lawsuit is going to trial.
It's an immense relief. I'm wary of looking at this as a turning point, but I think this time it's different.
Dr. Lisa Van Susteren, a forensic psychiatrist, conducts evaluations in order to testify that the kids have been harmed by climate change as a result of the government's actions.
What we are doing to children is beyond the imagination, I think, of most people. And I probably would not know myself, except that I have sat in a room and I have listened to them. The kids need to see that people in power, particularly people in government, are taking their role to protect them seriously.
24/7 access to social media, connecting these kids in a common cause, but upping the pressure, too.
It can be such a positive space. It can be a space to amplify your voice and to get your message across to other people, but it can also be a space where an echo chamber is almost formed, where just negative messages and terrifying realities are just kind of bounced along from person to person.
Amid a worsening mental health crisis among young people, the Surgeon General released a comprehensive report detailing some of those struggles and what those in charge plan to do about it.
I was wondering if climate anxiety was at all part of your findings. Would this be addressed in the bipartisan legislation that you're currently working on? Because it's obviously a pertinent issue among young people.
There are many factors that drive and impact an individual's mental health. We hear this time and time again in the roundtables that I do with young people around the country. So yes, we have to address those deeper underlying factors, but we also have to move in parallel to provide greater access to care.
In the 53-page report, just 3 mentions of climate change. The Biden administration vowed to tackle global warming, but so far hasn't made much progress, according to advocates. The lack of action leaving these kids wondering, what will it take?
There is a common denominator in what we're discussing here, and it's children. Honestly, if you're really doubting that climate change is a massive factor in the future of your children, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's undeniable at this point.
I think everybody handles stress differently. Honestly, the stress really feeds into my work. It really motivates me. I can channel that energy into doing something about the problem as opposed to dwelling on the problem or becoming apathetic or resigning to some predetermined fate.
The stress is there because I worry about it. I mean, I have grandkids after all. You worry about what's the world going to be like for them. But my response to stress like that is to work harder.
I definitely do the sort of typical self-care things like play with my dog. She's a big part of my life. But a lot of it for me is about sitting in that emotion and not pushing it away and talking with friends, colleagues, my advisor about the weight that we're carrying.
One of the ways that we mitigate or try to address some of those climate anxiety feelings is to have students come out to the research space or to the garden where we hold the burns to give them the hands-on experience, focusing on the regenerative effects that fire and land keeping will bring. I think that gives them an experience that helps with the climate anxiety and climate uneasiness.
It's not hopeless. There are things that are going to change that are beyond our control at this point in time. But how we respond to that change is really what defines us as individuals and as a society.
On one hand, I see so many activists, especially young activists, working really hard to make policy changes. However, on the other hand, I see large corporations continuing to lobby for policies that protect their bottom line. And so it's frustrating to watch that.
As a climate scientist, I see a meteor hurtling directly toward our achingly beautiful planet, and I don't yet see society or world leaders mobilizing to stop it. Fossil fuels are heating our planet at a rate of 1/10 of a degree Celsius every 5 years. This may not sound like much, but for an entire planet to heat this quickly is both astounding and terrifying. The disasters we are living through now are just the beginning. At every additional fraction of heating, climate disasters will come faster and hit harder. Like gut punches to our global society, they will increasingly stress infrastructure systems, economic systems, energy systems, food and water systems, political systems, and ecosystems. The proximal cause of climate destruction is burning fossil fuels. Before we had a fossil fuel industry, the planet was in energy balance. The same amount of energy came in as sunlight as went back out to space, so it stayed at a constant temperature. Burning gas, coal, and oil has changed that. It continues pushing our planet further and further out of balance, forcing it to heat up. The crisis has been overwhelmingly caused by the global north, with impacts hitting the global south soonest and hardest. And powerful vested interests are doing what they can to block action.
Please answer with a simple yes or no. Does your bank have a policy against funding new oil and gas products? Mr. Diamond.
Absolutely not, and that would be the road to hell for America.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Sir, you know what? Everybody that got relief from student loans has a bank account with your bank should probably take out their account and close their account.
Climate change is the defining issue of our time. And I'm extremely worried because with the war in Ukraine and with several other events, climate change seems to have moved out of the priorities for many decision makers around the world. And this is a suicide. We see emissions growing and we see fossil fuels become fashionable again. When we know that fossil fuels are the main responsible for the progressive war against nature that we have been waging in our history. It is absolutely essential to reduce emissions from now on. And unfortunately, when we should be able to reduce 45% of the emissions up to 2030, we are with the perspective of increased emissions of 14% in 2030. Not much time to turn things around.
5 young victims of the climate crisis recently launched legal action at Europe's top human rights court against the Energy Charter Treaty. The Energy Charter Treaty protects fossil fuel investments and is a massive driver of the climate crisis. It is shameful that still today we protect these kinds of practices in an escalating emergency.